So when are your next gigs?
Well, the first one now looks like it's the 24th of July.
Yeah, it's about the time that we've had various ones cancelled already this year, but I think ours is at the start of July. I don't know, that's going to work.
Yeah, well, unless it's part of a pilot. I've actually had stuff cancelled in August because the lead times are such that if there was yet another cancellation or delay, they would be so seriously out of pocket they can't risk it. And the problem we've got with our industry is that it hasn't been underwritten with any insurance from the government. And if that's simple,
doing that,
because I think it's a whole, ethos of the arts being pretty undervalued and having a very clueless culture secretary. I'm very pleased that lots of groups are lobbying, like Nighttime Industries Association. Michael Kills is doing a lot. People like Sasha Lord that run Warehouse Project and various other great festivals and events. They're all doing what they can to bring it to the attention of select committees and so forth. But I mean,
would you class yourself an activist?
I think I was more of an activist in the past. I think being a single parent makes certain things quite tricky.
Yeah,
in my life, how I'm juggling everything. But when asked, as I said, I've done a Faithless album this year, and it coincided with lockdown and a real lack of measures and understanding of how our industry works and its contribution economically, spiritually, emotionally to the the fabric of this country and its standing as a global.
Bliss for president, yeah.
You see, so when asked during interviews about the new album, of course it was coming out in a completely unexpected context where usually we would do the 18-month tour after the album and visit lots of different territories to do promotion, and of course all of that fell over. So it was a very unusual environment to put a record out into, and it meant that we're very reliant on streaming. So I did quite a lot of press, and of course wanting to fight for my industry within that was very important. And
are you a member of any organisations or anything?
Well, Musicians Union, things like that. I mean, loosely affiliated. There's been lots of, if you like, pressure groups like Let Us Dance, and We Make Events, and anybody I can give any sort of platform to that.
And if you were
for us, I try and contribute where I can.
Yeah. I mean, I know you've got enough on your plate, being a single mum and everything, trying to keep a career going. But if you're ever interested, the Ivers Academy, we're doing quite a lot of good work in terms of lobbying and pressure groups and stuff, and we're quite well connected in that world. And if there's ever anything you were interested in getting involved with, I would definitely encourage you to do so, because
thank you. Yes,
you're articulate.
Why don't we do that after the interview?
Yeah, you're articulate and you're intelligent, and we need as many people who can get the point across effectively on behalf of artists.
I think it's understanding that our industry is such a broad church, and that so many people are freelance within it, and it's much easier to sort of divide and rule because we don't all speak with one voice. Sort of little bands, little crew members, events companies, backline, all of these separate moving parts create what we do. But ultimately, people are quite disparate. They go from one job to another. I move from one festival and one venue to another, and so it's harder. It's not the same as having an organisation where the personnel are fixed, and I think that's why our industry has suffered from not enough people being able to campaign and say, listen, I'm not getting furlough. I don't qualify for self-employed income, but I'm also extremely highly qualified at what I do and have been paying tax for, X number of years and have been extremely employable, and to sort of say our industry isn't viable. I mean, it makes me sick. I can't believe it. But then I can believe it because this government to me is utterly odious and morally and spiritually bankrupt. And just looking at education, they're cutting funding to arts courses at university, and it's so short-sighted. It is unbelievable because in every walk of life, even if it doesn't look, exactly creative as in a performing art, even, brochures that you would get made for some big party political meeting, they'll have graphic design on them. That will have taken someone with an artistic eye to go and do a course at the London College of Printing or wherever, or St Martin's. and you have a strong visual sense, and to ignore the fact that the arts actually creep into so many other sectors.
It's ridiculous
in our world. It's unbelievable. You just, these people walking around with their head in the place where the sun don't shine.
Yeah. I mean, this is not really a new thing. It's just got a lot worse. I mean, for instance,
it does feel that way, yes.
Even things like, I mean, we're okay because we've had a successful career and we've earned enough money, pretty much. You have to keep trying. But, even back 20 or 30 years ago, just even things like trying to get a mortgage and trying to prove, they always want people who have got regular, steady income so they can just milk them like a cow, And, so, where it's like some years you'd have an incredible income and some years to be fuck all. So,
yes,
it's a difficult thing. And that's how, and it's like, it always reminds me of that Monty Python sketch where you've got John Cleese as the accountant who's saying, somebody comes in and asks for him to contribute to a charity or something. He's going, don't think I understand it. Does that mean I give you money? It's like that kind of mentality. Anyway. Let's go back to your growing up, because there's not much. I mean, I've not done extremely deep research, but I'm just interested as to how somebody as talented as you. Did you have a lot of musical training when you were growing up? Where did you grow up?
So in North London, and my dad was a jazz musician.
Right.
So I was very, very lucky, and he's absolutely massively into gadgets, and he plays keyboards. His main instrument's saxophone, actually.
Right.
And he had a big sort of schism when he was younger, where he really wanted to do music, but it was very, as it always is, quite an unstable career, and it was feast or famine. And he had a quite successful jazz band. He actually had Dudley Moore playing piano for him.
No.
Yeah, he did many moons ago. And he did a series of concerts which was sort of poetry and jazz together on South Bank, which was probably the zenith of his musical career at that point. But then the Beatles became really successful, and he got less and less gigs because the kind of, the mood changed and the audience changed with it. So he ended up going to medical school. So completely sort of changed career, but he's always had a huge passion for music, and there was a lot of music in the house, but he loved gadgets. And he had very early synthesizers from the sort of day they were invented in the house.
Okay, let's dig into this a bit.
So yeah, I think I was immersively around, but there was one that had a flexi disc that you put in the front. It was kind of wavy brown. It was this brown and cream thing, and we had tin foil all down the back of it because it would receive all the taxis. I mean, you could, if you switched it on, you could hear the taxi controllers coming through the back, which was quite. I suppose you can think of
art installation.
Exactly, it was. It's a found objet trouvé, in the back of the keyboard coming through. But I think when it really sunk in for me was, bands like yourself, Human League, the 80s was synth domination, Kraftwerk. It was this music for me that had come from another planet. And my dad had just bought, at vast expense, one of the very first DX7s. And he also bought a little a sequencer that went with it. I think it was called a QX7, and it had a little drum machine. And I would sit at home and just make tunes when he wasn't noodling away on it. I would have a go. So I think it kind of, it was sort of in my DNA. There was this synergy with the music that I was hearing all over the radio, and the music that really spoke to me, which was this new electronic music with synthesizers and drum machines. And I guess it started then. So I was about 12, 13. It's talking like 81, 82. Artists like The Art of Noise, Thomas Dolby really spoke to me. And I would have those albums on cassette. And again, this was when the Walkman was born. So you have this personal way of listening to music that was sort of so intimate and only for you.
Yeah, that made a big difference. People take all that.
It really did. Well, we didn't have to row over the stereo anymore, and I think I was very, very lucky. So I grew up in a sort of musically eclectic household. My dad, as I say, was very, very competent musician. He played a lot of jazz. They had a lot of records from sort of Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk. He loved Keith Jarrett is one of his favorite artists. So I was exposed to quite a lot of, I would say, quite esoteric music.
Yeah, and well, but what comes through? I mean, I've been doing a bit of a speed resume of your output this morning, and what a pleasure that is. Because I mean, I've never listened to them on my big system here in my studio, and beautiful Bowser Wilkins speakers, and they are so amazingly well produced. The record.
Oh, thank you.
Number one.
Part to do with Rollo, my studio partner.
Well,
we sit there bickering, and we have done for the last 30 years about how loud hi-hats should be, and ultimately it doesn't make any difference. But
now we know that. That's experience.
I think the sort of marriage of technology and how people listen to music and consume music, and the fact that clubs and the sound systems they have in them, it's a very different way of hearing music. So this, records that were perhaps a lot more impressionistic back in the day, now the sort of high definition is so revealing, if you like, and the detail that comes out, and when you've got a void system or a function one, people spec their clubs now, and they have produced records to fit the systems that they're coming out.
Right.
So there's sort of perhaps rough and readiness that really attracted us to the rave scene in the beginning. Yeah. It's got a lot more glossy now, I think.
It has.
And I always like the undercurrent of roughness, and I feel like I hope we do a sort of nice marriage of the slick and the beautiful, and something that's yearning and moving, but something that also feels more organic underneath it.
There's a right. If you strip away the kind of top layer of, is immediately identifiable as your sound with the, arpeggiation, the synthesizer, the drum machine, or whatever, the house beats, whatever. Strip all that away, it's largely very beautiful and very atmospheric music that could be played on a variety of different forces, and that's why, you've obviously gone on to do lots of stuff for TV and film. People can hear that, the heart of it, the authenticity of it. In a club, it sounds epic, right? So then that is your brand, but actually underneath, it's a real talent that you have for composition, which differentiates it from a lot of the kind of house composers and house producers.
Well, it's very kind. But I'm very. I sort of see music in my head, and I love parts that intersect. So I'm a maximalist. Actually, what we end up doing is taking a lot of stuff out, because I can always hear another part that would fit, another riff, another counter melody. And actually, sometimes what really works in the club environment is very different from the listening experience, where you can hear all the layers and the details, and it comes out different every time. Like one of my favourite producers is William Orbit, and I love the texture in his records, and that's definitely something that influenced the sound of Faithless. But yeah, as you say, the medium of listening to music in a club actually needs to be a little bit more simple.
Yeah, definitely.
And have an immediacy without being crass. So it is that sort of balance, of something that's listenable over and over again and throws up something different, little details in the sonics.
Exactly.
I love the little noodly wibbly bits.
Yeah, I did an interview recently with Telex. Do you know Telex?
No, I don't.
Oh my God, you got to go and listen to them. They were like early electronic experimentation pop artists from Belgium.
Okay.
Had like late 70s, early 80s.
All right. I was into
the bit before around the first two Humor League.
Like cans.
Yeah, but no, much more cheeky, much more kind of playful. Anyway, but they I listened to their kind of back catalogue when I was interviewing them, and I only know them for the kind of really pop stuff. But then when I listened to it in detail, I'm going, there's so much stuff going on in detail in the background, and I love all that stuff. And then you think about tracks like, I DJ, not to the same extent as you, but I DJ my influences. The 1970s, some of the kind of Germanic stuff, some of the kind of like Suicide and like the funk stuff as well, actually, from electronic, which is undervalued and underrated in this entire scene, as far as I'm concerned. And if obviously the epic and the absolute floor filler is "I Feel Love,"
Rhoda. Yes.
But if you listen to that, it's quite. I mean, it's really it's very, very simple, and it's the kind of leavening of the female voice that really makes it come to life. If you imagine "I Feel Love" with a male voice, it just wouldn't work. It's interesting. I love all that stuff. Anyway, another question. Who do you regard as your direct, or who did you regard as your direct competition at that time with Faithless?
Direct competition? Oh, yeah. That's interesting. Okay, so I would say, as in terms of being incredibly influential and bands that we looked to who were in the same ilk, I mean, Underworld and Left Field. Left Field particularly, because to make an album to me is as beautiful and exciting and dramatic as Leftism.
It's a fantastic album. And I know one of the guys, when they were making that, he was an engineer that worked for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, what, which Paul Daly? Neil Barnes.
It must have been
the two of them. But they had the people in the studio, didn't they?
Yeah. And they were saying, we've got this album that we're going to bring out, and it's like, and he played it for me. I'm going, fucking hell, this is gonna go big, and it did. Anyway, and I met William Orbit the other day as well, actually, and I think he's going to do the podcast. So if you have any questions for him, let me know. Do you know him?
How were you such a genius? Well, I mean, what I love
the guy.
There's a musical progeny there with Georgia, who's Neil Barnes' daughter, who's carving her own path as a kind of really, I think a real bright star with her own singular voice. Yeah, and weirdly, I did a gig with Neil Barnes a few years ago, quite randomly in Cornwall, in a camel sanctuary, as you do, which was insane. I mean, maybe they don't get enough parties down in Cornwall, but when they do get them, they go absolutely batshit crazy. But anyway, it was
the camels feel about.
Well, there was a terrible flood. The rains didn't stop. The car park got flooded. The camels escaped. They were wandering around the site. The promotions in tears. The DJ booth was in a great big spaceship in the middle of the field. It was extraordinary and extremely funny. But and he was DJing, and I think so was Paul Hartnell from Orbital as well. And it was just absolutely bonkers. There was an 8-mile tailback to try and get to the gig, and it was Halloween. So people had abandoned their cars and they're walking down these tiny Cornish roads, with axes.
That's the zombie.
Exactly, with blood streaming down their faces. It was an absolutely mad night, but bizarrely, we were staying in the same B&B and had a Cornish breakfast the next day. Yeah. Remarkably, we got on site and off site with sort of 2-hour delays either end, covered in mud. It was a great event. But we had breakfast the next day, and then Neil Barnes was telling me about it. He said, my daughter's really talented. And I'm not just saying that because I'm her dad. And it was really amazing feeling that musical lineage was being pumped out. But yeah, those records were hugely influential. And Underworld, the way they were so hypnotic, Rollo and I would always listen to Underworld records and be, fascinated with how long they'd loop things for. That actually you didn't have to rush. And particularly Insomnia, we absolutely, use those records as references really for what we were doing. That sense of build, the tension and the release, and I felt Underworld was sort of peerless with that. The way that they would just suck you into their world and they weren't going to let you have it till very near the end, they were very influential.
Yeah, I was a big fan of Freur as well.
Yeah, so that was their
a great record that was.
Yes, they were all over smash hits. I remember in the 80s, and it was so funny that they came out of that being a bit of a sort of art house, indie punk band, and then Darren Emerson joined them and kind of basically focused them on the dance floor, and they've been there ever since, haven't they? But again, it showed what music could be in the dance world, and I think it was, maybe a legacy from burning disco records that dance music had such a sort of, dirty name in the music business. Somehow it was less than other forms of music, maybe because it was sort of, you know, enjoyed in the black and gay communities in New York, and therefore it was already subversive. But, you know, now we can look back 30 years later and look at the canon of dance music, the songs that have come out from it, you know, the global movement that's come out for it. And bands like Underworld and Leftfield, absolutely, in the world of British dance, absolutely made us believe we could make an album, and that it was a listening experience as well as a clubbing experience, and that you could be successful in all of those things. And also it really helped. Rollo writes lyrics as well. So that was a very important part of it, I think, is a lot of dance music artists just can't write lyrics.
Yeah.
And they do become quite banal, hence giving some of dance music a bit of a bad name. And again, Leftfield and Underworld were more adventurous in that department and worked with, you know, singer-songwriters, rappers, artists who had a flow, had something to say, or something that was an artistic statement. So again, those artists, particularly at that time, you know, as well as the hundreds of thousands of records that we bought between us that influenced us along the way, they were the contemporaries, I'd say.
Yeah. There was a certain elements of what you're doing was quite Massive Attack as well, I think. Was they an influence of yours?
Yeah, absolutely. But in a way, slightly less so, because they didn't have the clubbing angle that we have. They're still essentially a chill out experience, or a chilled experience, a stoner's experience, which we were massive stoners, so that was great. So, you know, of course, they're part of the musical DNA, and of course, using a rapper like Maxi, working with that tone of voice. You know, Massive Attack again showed us that British rap wasn't the poor cousin to American rap, which again, you know, so many talented UK rap artists never got a look in because it just couldn't compare to the artists pouring out of America.
Okay. So next question is, what's your process? Do you just switch everything on, set a few beats up, get a vibe going, and then... Or how does it work with you?
It's sort of different every time, really. For me, it can come from a chord progression. Yes, beats are a great basis, thinking about what tempo we're going to work in. Sometimes it'll be a fragment of a vocal. I start writing around that. You know, if there's nothing there, yes, it will be a beat, so I don't go wildly out of time. We are a bit metronomic. Although when we play live, often it wasn't to a click, which is quite interesting. It was quite joyous because you could get those little surges that you know, it just incremental kind of ebb and flow in the music, which you don't get when everything is metronomic. But of course, most house music isn't performed live, but we had obviously music that went outside of that template.
So how did you...
But in the studio with a beat, with some... I need a good bass line sound. If the sounds aren't right, I kind of does my head in.
Okay, and what's your favourite bassline synth?
Favourite bassline synth? Well, I'd say I use plugins now. I use Sileg, I use Arturia, because they've got loads of classic synths in there, which are just fantastic. You know, Moogs deliver the roundness of the sound.
That's right. Yes. Do you use a lot of analog synths?
No, I don't. I use plugins now. No, they're all in storage, which is kind of sad, but I
have you gone into room
for them? Well, this is a good question. They're in a lockup in Southampton. I've got loads of, what have we got? JD800s, all the stuff I use live, JP8000s, a lot of Roland gear, some great Yamaha and Korgs.
Do you
I use plugins now, and
right.
Maybe that's the non-purist answer. Is it would be really good. Actually, do you know what? We did get our Juno 103s out and started tweaking about with them, which is really fun, because back in the day when we made those big anthems like Insomnia and Salve, all over the first album, Reverence actually is lots of stuff out of the Juno, and it would often go quite wonky. I don't know if some of the connectors were broken, but you'd never quite get the same sound twice, and that sort of element of surprise was a lot of fun. And I know Brian Eno kind of works a bit like that, just switching something on, seeing what random noise will come out of it. So inspiration and starting work comes in many flavours. Sometimes I'll have a vocal to work on and I'll totally reconstitute the track, or I make a lot of backing tracks essentially.
Right.
And a lot of them can be quite simple because I want to use chords that songwriters will find easy to work with as well.
And I want to talk to you as a dance, as a composer in the dance framework. What do you? I mean, I can't help it. I grew up with my older sisters, and I grew up with Motown. I grew up with, traditional songwriting, and then I got into glam and all the rock stuff in the 70s, and then obviously the electronic stuff. But I can't get away from the fact, and I have done long form kind of improvisational kind of dance-based stuff, but I can't get away from, I always find it's much more of a challenge to create an impactful piece of music in a short form, in a structured form that people kind of feel, at one level, they feel familiar with, and then I feel like gives me more room for experimentation on the top. This is a long-winded question, but really what I'm asking is, do you make a long-form piece and then you edit it down to something that's maybe a single, or do you not bother?
Well, at the moment, I mean, really, there's no rules in dance music. That's why I love it. People like Underworld, or, for me, Steve Reich, massive influence, things that unfurl very slowly with these incremental changes are absolutely compelling. And there is a bit more of a current trend, things changing every 4 bars now. But ultimately, we're in the era of streaming. Do people take 8 minutes to listen to a track? They don't. They click off, and it doesn't count as a play if it doesn't go beyond 2 minutes and 17 seconds, apparently. So annoyingly, we are forced to condense what are longer, more expansive, widescreen pieces of music to a 3-minute format. And I have to say, we hate doing it because I think some music suffers because of it. It's not how
it's definitely.
Hence, being blessed to have the album as an art form, to be more expansive and to just let things run, and for the music to have a bit of swagger and space, and of course there are moments of absolute genius. You think, how on earth did someone shoehorn that into three incredible minutes? But ultimately the music that we love and that stands the test of time often isn't rammed into that format.
It's true. I know. Well, with Hem 17 we did a nearly 10-minute track on one of our albums, and that's a lot of our fans, that's their favourite track,
Yeah, but also the DJ needs to go to the bathroom, so we rely on those very long edits. Do you remember, was it Manuel Gotching, E2, E4, which became the basis for Sueno Latino, which was a kind of classic house track? I've got an original vinyl of that, and that is something like, I think it might even be getting on for 12 minutes. I mean, it's almost as long as you can cut on one side of vinyl without it being really quiet.
Yeah.
It's a perfect nip off to the toilet record. Oh, I had a few too many shandies.
Or just enough time for a little bit of foreplay and a bit of sex, perhaps.
There is that.
15 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the average, apparently.
Well, 12 inches. There you go.
There you go. I knew it. We got to the So tell me about you must have some very the camel story is quite good. Tell me about the amazing. Have you got any incredible stories of your touring and performing live? So it was a wild time, wasn't it? The 90s. I mean, let's face it. I know a few people from that period who you are very. You're obviously clear, lucid. I know a lot of people who weren't so fortunate who came out the other end a bit messed up. So, I don't know, just interested because that was past my time. My party years were the 80s, really. So,
there are loads and loads of bad memories. But they say what goes on tour stays on tour.
Oh, okay.
So I have to leave it with a bit of mystique. But what I will say is has just been a weekend of Glastonbury recaps because the festival couldn't happen, and they did show a little clip of our first band, Glastonbury. I first went in 1987, and it was the baptism of fire. And I went with Youth CND, and it cost 15 quid, and maybe a couple of quid extra for the coach. I mean, how times have changed.
Yeah.
But when we went and performed for the first time, and the record, I think the first album was starting to connect, and it was still, the holy grail of gigs at that time. But it happened to be England versus someone at football. And so the crowd we had in front of us was laughable. Our sound engineer's wife was ill. So our tour manager and Rollo came on that gig to do the sound. Rollo'd never done live sound before. Every time he pulled the faders up for the backing vocals, there was feedback. He completely freaked out.
God.
Barely touched the mixing desk apart from to push the drums up and maybe the synthesizers. I was terrified. So I don't think we had backing vocals for most of the set, which was a shame because the album went all over the place. It was quite soulful in places, and there was quite a lot of female vocal on it. And I think there was about 2,000 people in a field that could have probably held 20,000. But the 2,000 of people that were there in the pouring rain and the worst mud, they were going for it like dervishes. It was incredible. But we were covered in mud backstage and just had to change 3 times before we could even get on the stage without being muddy. And it was, I think our tour bus got stuck in a ditch and had to be pushed out. Yeah, on the way to the next gig. So let's just say it was quite an inauspicious beginning where we all came off stage thinking, oh my God, was that terrible or was it good? Not even knowing where to pitch it as an experience.
Was it on the telly?
Yeah, it was. It was. So I guess it was early days of Glastonbury being televised. 98, it was the first show that we did there. And then we sort of graduated to doing better shows and bigger shows, and we're on the Pyramid stage twice, which was just
Fantastic.
Magnificent. That's one of the more savoury stories.
Right. Okay.
But it just seems very immediate because I literally had people texting me going, "Oh, I've just seen you on the telly."
Yeah. Well, that's when you know you've made it, when you're on the telly or top of the plate. It used to be top of the pops.
Well, I think when you made it was when you go to Thailand and you see your album bootlegged in the cheap market there on the beach. That's when you got very excited. When they've heard of us in Thailand.
Yeah.
We're even worth bootlegging and selling for $2 on the beach.
So just to give people a bit of a kind of flavour of what the world was like for bands like yourself. I mean, the thing is, your style of music was excellent, but it was what people probably don't fully understand a lot of the time, unless you were there, is how many different territories that bands like you were popular in. I mean, I can imagine what you do was always becoming like the lingua franca of world popular music, because it speaks largely, it's not really just about being in the English-speaking territories. What you do would work just about everywhere. So you must have gone a lot of places. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we worked out we'd gone sort of with the circumference of the world something like 10,000 times. We'd been to the moon and back twice.
Really?
If you add it up, which doesn't sound good for the eco-warriors out there.
Not really.
We're worried about the amount of, obviously, flights that we took. But that, what can you do when a record explodes and you have a working band? Also, we were on a very tiny label. We didn't have tour support. So,
which label were you on?
Cheeky Records, which was part owned by Rollo, and the parent label was Champion, which was one of the only independents in the UK. And Champion had made its money. Mel Medalla, who, really was an incredible label boss in many ways, he had propped that label up with these very unusual records. One was Salt and Pepper, Push It.
Love it.
Another one was he signed Will Smith when he was Jazzy Prince, the Fresh.
Right, I remember.
And that Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. He signed a record and had Will Smith flying backwards and forwards to do Top of the Pops, and apparently he was really homesick and run up a massive phone bill talking to his girlfriend. Never used the hotel phones. That's what I remember from back in the day.
Yeah.
The mini bar, you end up ridiculous bill. But the other record, which was absolutely enormous for him, was Robin S. Show Me Love. And because he was so canny with licensing to different territories, and there was a record that Rollo and I had made, also with Ben Langmaid, who you know, part
of Ben, yeah.
LaRue, of course you do. How Faithless started was really because I met Ben in a record shop. We made a record together. Mela Champion noticed it, got Rollo into the office because he produced it, and they decided to do a joint venture together, and Cheeky Records was that joint venture. And because Mel was truly independent, he could sign any record that he had on his roster to any number of licensees who really wanted that record across the board. So it wasn't like it sat on a major label and in other territories apart from the home territory. It was just met with disinterest because it wasn't a core artist. So we were in this very unusual and lucky position. Well, as many independent labels, there were a lot of dance labels back then, but Mel had these huge hits, so he had a bit more flexibility.
Right.
But he hadn't put out albums. He'd never put out an album before, so it was quite unusual.
Right.
So Cheeky was the first record label that was 50% Rollo, 50% Mel, and that's what Faithless came out on. And that's, the records that Ben, Rollo and myself made together came out on Cheeky as well.
Yeah, what I'm more inspired about is the fact that you're on this tiny label, which is successful and we're obviously respected, with a dynamic leader who's going, right, this is what we're going to do. To organise the promotion and the touring for a band of your size, my view on that would have been, oh my God, we need to go on to we need to get onto a big label now. But you stayed. And so did you have really good management, or did you do it yourself?
No, we had no management until our 6th album. We managed ourselves. Partly because in the early days, so the first 2 albums were Cheeky, but in the end it became an unworkable situation. We also felt that other bands in our ilk, like I'd mentioned, Underworld, Leftfield, Chemical Brothers, for example, they'd all been picked up by a major and they had major label budgets. And we felt, we couldn't compete. We couldn't make the videos we wanted to make because we just didn't have the sort of funding. And things got difficult in the office for various reasons. In the end, so Rollo sold the whole of Cheeky Records to Sony, it was BMG then, and then it became Sony BMG. So that included albums by other artists on the label, one of which was Dido, in fact. So they did very, very, very well. Rollo's sister, not my sister.
Rollo's.
Yeah, that's right. So there was Faithless. We'd, released 2 albums completely with A&Ring it all ourselves and managing it all ourselves. And it was, I would say, utter chaos. Putting a band together only happened because our radio pluggers said, nobody really knows about you outside of the dance community. We need to let the world know you've got an album. Can you put a band together? So we put together this ridiculous, unwieldy band with 10 people in it. And our first gig was at the Jazz Cafe, and we didn't even fit on the stage. I mean, it was absurd. And it was all self-funded. Maxie and I didn't pay ourselves for the first sort of 5 or 6 years of it. And then we suddenly thought, you know what, this is ridiculous. Why aren't we getting paid? We're doing double the work. So that changed. But initially, to get the show on the road, that's how we did it.
I mean, sorry, I have to interrupt you there because I know my listeners, our listeners, will be inspired by your story because, certainly our students. I guess you teach at Triad as well with me.
I do, yes.
And I must find your story inspirational because, firstly, to be a strong woman in this industry is a tough thing to do. Secondly, to have the drive and intelligence to make it work without, obviously, we all have advice and lawyers and accountants and stuff, but, you really are a quite a unique character in terms of keeping it, controlling it, really. Yeah, it is. That's a big beast to control.
Well, yeah, it was. It was very unwieldy. Ultimately, because the beginning was, we were the band and the label, so there were sort of less clashes, there were less battles to fight. But as it became internationally successful, it definitely was harder to sort of, there's so many moving parts, as you know, when you suddenly are being called to go here, there and everywhere, and you have to prioritise, and you've never done it before. You don't know which things are important to do. But I think we always had an innate sense of what was naff, what was a bad look, what would feel, something that would compromise the integrity of what we were doing. So I hope that we kind of made decisions based on a sort of gut feeling of what felt right. But there was also, and I'd say this is very much for Rollo, a real understanding that being on a small label, you're offered opportunities you take them,
Yes.
especially TV. So there was a feeling in the band at one time, like, oh, we don't want to go on CD UK. It's really naff. It's like, listen, with one gig on TV, you reach 20 million people.
Yeah.
You know, you could tour for 6 years and never reach that amount.
Exactly.
Continuously, for example. So he had this real understanding that we were on a small label and we had to make that work for us.
Yeah.
And then obviously by then we'd have success on our own terms. So when we signed to a major, people didn't come down the studio and say, make it more like a hit single, make sure there's a verse and a chorus and a middle eight and so forth. There was a real lack of interference, I'd say, that characterised our 30 odd years in music. And I do feel really blessed for that. But also we've had to have some big fights, and it's quite be bloody minded when the force of a record label is saying they want you to do this and not that, and us digging our heels in and saying no. It can be quite scary. It can be quite scary, and one has to have a sort of, you know, confidence that you are doing the right thing. When you've got a whole team of people whose sort of career and their bottom line, you know, and you have to remember to keep the sort of music separate from the business. And hope that making the right decisions will somehow, what can I say, though, it will manifest in a way that creates a future for you, rather than doing the thing that might seem immediately rewarding, or rewarding to a certain set of people, but leaves you feeling like you've compromised yourself.
Well, also with a big record, with a big record label, you're not really privy to where you are in their list of priorities.
Yeah. Well, you certainly know when you're not a priority.
Yeah.
So we certainly learned that lesson along the way of what it feels like to be right down there.
Whereas, you know, you're in control of things, then you are number one priority in a list of one, you know, and then so therefore, for good or bad, I believe that people can sense that. You know, I believe people, every single podcast, I use the word authenticity too much, but I think it's the real thread that runs through all the people I'm talking to that I admire, because they are true to their own system and their own beliefs within the industry, and that's when you get the interesting stuff, because it's not just you going, I want to do something daring musically, right? It's actually, you can't help it. You feel compelled to do something interesting. And then that's not filtered through some fucking A&R, 20-year-old's A&R person who doesn't know your work, you know? Yeah,
and I absolutely agree with you. I feel that we did make a record that was, yes, it lived and breathed in the clubs and we wanted DJs to play it, but it also came from a feeling of frustration that dance music was perceived as disposable and, you know, lyrically banal and so forth. We met Maxi, who of course had this incredible Buddhist philosophy, and it was like our conversations with him, we're like, well, let's put that in a record. It just felt like we were making records that weren't to meet a criteria of what was successful at the time. Yeah. You know, it wasn't quite so cookie cutter. You know what I mean? Conformist. For better or worse, it stood in its own corner. And we've made loads of mistakes along the way and probably cost ourselves several 100,000 record sales, you know, by insisting on doing a sort of very dark trip hop follow-up to a big club banger, for example. But feeling like, well, we had that window where the world was looking, so we wanted to put forward, you know, the deeper, richer side of Faithless, for example. But I'm sure that gave A&R people massive headaches, because people are like, no, it's not a dance single. What are you putting this record into the world for? And it's like, well, actually, maybe that's why we're having a conversation 25 years later. And if we just done one dance record after another, it would feel a bit of a linear, one-dimensional life. And that's not what we wanted to express musically anyway.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. So theatre, tell me about theatre. You've written for theatre, right?
I have, and I'd love to do it again, actually. Sort of reminded me, I have to press those buttons again. Just out of the blue, really, I got asked to collaborate at the National Theatre on 2 different occasions, and really, really enjoyed it. Really enjoy that sense of writing to a brief and someone else, it's their baby. And being collaborative within that and having those artistic conversations.
It's great, isn't it? I love it.
Yeah, and workshopping it was magical.
Yeah.
I did 2
Actually, the rehearsals and the work are almost more fun than the actual, the performances are great, but the entire, when I was working with the Royal Ballet, I loved the kind of iterative process of you create a piece of music, they do a bit of choreography and they go, oh, we'd like to develop it in this direction. Can you write a piece that is this tempo or accelerando, decelerando, whatever.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. And that's where the magic happens, I think, anyway.
Yeah. I love it. For me, it's a really good discipline because it's not making a hit single and it doesn't have to be on the radio and it's not an album campaign and there's 18 months of touring. It's just a separate space to be in. And it's really good for me. I feel like it flexes my muscles. I love that world anyway. I love modern dance especially. And so I'm engaged.
Have you written for modern dance?
No, so that's one area I would absolutely love to. And actually, I have to tell you, I was just watching a great little thing on Netflix about Halston, the fashion designer, and Ewan McGregor plays him, and it's quite good. There's a lot of gay sex in it, which my son walked in at a particularly rude moment. Which was like, don't watch that. Just go into the other room for 5 minutes when it'll be over. It was quite funny.
My wife just presses the fast forward button.
Yeah. I didn't get to it in time. He just popped up out of nowhere. But anyway, unbeknownst to me, part of the story was Halston was very good friends with Martha Graham,
right?
Dance genius, and made the most exquisite costumes for one of her ballets. And he had a few years in the wilderness after Studio 54. Did loads of gear, got wasted. Sold his name. Which is a really cautionary tale for anyone in sort of with an artistic endeavour going on. And this was a bit of a comeback for him, but he designed these exquisite costumes and looking at the synergy of the music, the colour, the costumes, the way the fabric moved.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All of that. It was exquisite. And to be involved in any sort of creative process, for me, it's absolutely...
Yeah. I was at...
it really is.
Lucky enough to work with the Royal Ballet, so...
How wonderful.
Oh, my God, it was amazing. Absolutely. I would love to go back and do some more stuff. And actually, if you ever want to get involved with I've got a friend of mine, Vanessa Fenton, who's used to be first artist at the Royal Ballet. And she's a choreographer and she's always she occasionally gets asked to do, commercial stuff and she's always looking for collaborators and stuff. So I might
please
in her direction. I think you get on really well.
I would be absolutely honoured. But also it inspires me. I go and see other people's shows, not just music shows, but dance shows. I go to Sadler's Wells. Well, I was going when we were allowed to enjoy creative endeavours because it gives me ideas. I go to the arts. I went the other day to see this amazing Japanese artist I'd never heard of, Ryohei Ikeda at 180 The Strand. Yeah. And it's almost like being inside an Aphex Twin record, but in 3 dimensions. And it was really intense. It was great, and I was inspired. I love the art that he creates. It's very digital. It does remind me of visuals at the Chemical Brothers show, for example, but the textures and the music and the tones and the pulses and the feeling of being ensconced in a digital age. I got so excited. I thought, oh God, I want to do a show. And that's what happens to me when I'm engaging in other people's creativity. It absolutely kind of lifts and inspires me.
You have to come and hear my 3D sound system in my studio here.
I'd love to. Which unit are you in? Are you next door?
6A. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm coming in. I'll be in from tomorrow onwards.
Will you?
Yeah.
I tell you what, I need to get my engineering to set it up again because I haven't used it for a couple of months. But what was I going to say? It's perfect for dance music. And in fact, when I used to have a studio in Brixton, on Brixton Hill, 3D sound studio, which is a circular studio, and we once had Underworld came down to hear it because they'd heard about it and they were looking at potentially using it for their live shows in Japan, where they got a massive audience out there, and it didn't come off. I was really pissed off. They liked it, but it was just too late in the process. They only found out late. But you would love it. It's perfect for electronic dance music.
Well, thank you. I'd love to come and blast some tunes. Do you ever go to Despacio, which is James Murphy from LCD?
Yeah, I know all about it. Yeah, that was the round out.
They hand-built these stacks, and it was magical. And they were playing, again, all their influences. And I remember walking in, hearing a record that was going back to what you were saying about the 70s and those experimental German bands. There was a record that was quite influential for me, but very underground and odd, by a member of Cannes called Holger Zucki.
Yeah, no.
Called Movies. And there's a song called Let's Get Cool in the Pool. And as I walked into the Roundhouse, they were playing this record, and I swear I'd not heard it for 30 odd years. And this feeling went from the bottom of my toes to the top of my head. It's extraordinary, exactly as you say. I'm in the round.
Yeah,
all the 3D sound system, absolutely amazing.
Yeah. We did the world's first 3D rock gig actually in the Roundhouse, and we did a reimagining of kind of M17's greatest hits, and some of the British Literary Foundation stuff as well. But in 3D, and with a ring of speakers up in the gantry and a ring at ground level, true 3D. So it's like you can move sound in any direction. And the first 15 minutes of the show, the kind of pre-show, was house lights down, and it was an electric storm in 3 dimensions. Right. There were people.
Why didn't anybody call me? How old was I then? 12. How many years ago was this?
This was about 10 years ago now.
Oh, okay. So I was an adult then and would have been able to get.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it was absolutely awe-inspiring stuff. And but yeah, I've done 3D DJing as well, which I think you'd find very interesting, where you can actually control the different sides of the stereo field. And
so is it like mid-side processing?
Yeah.
Whilst you're mixing, so what you?
Well, no, it's all in ambisonics. So it's basically you just got an object that you fly around in 3 dimensions on your screen. What we normally do is we anchor one side of the stereo to the floor in the middle of the room, because otherwise people fall over. They can't dance to it or anything. And then we take one side of the stereo and we fly that around. And I did it in Fabric actually. On their big system. It was fucking awesome. We augmented it. You have to have 2 rings of speakers so you can do the high thing as well.
I love the sound. But it sounds like we should do a collaboration. Maybe do a gig again if we do a Faithless special.
Let's do it. We could do a Faithless.
So magical, wouldn't it?
With
I love that idea of making things special, but also bringing things to people that they've never seen before.
Exactly.
I think there is absolutely a buzz about that. That's what kind of keeps me going as well.
We did we also did a 3D sound thing in the Undercroft under the Royal Albert Hall, which is enormous. Where the loading bay, basically, which is the size of the hall. And we had 2 DJ teams either side of the of it, and about couple of thousand people, and it was in 3D, and one side was Warp Records and the other side was Ninja Tunes, and we taught them how to throw big sound objects at each other in 3D in between the tracks when they were doing a versus thing. It was really cool. Anyway, yes, we need to talk about that. Okay, we're getting to the end of this now. This is the stupid smash hits type.
Is it the quickfire round?
Quickfire round.
Well, I'm there. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, what's your favourite film?
I have to say one of them is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It just came out the top of my head. I discovered it. It is quite Buddhist if you watch it as an adult. But the message beneath it, that experiences and people and friendship matter more than materialism and objects.
Yeah.
Actually, it's quite beautiful. Remember that Cameron, one of the characters, has got a dad who neglects him and loves his car more than he loves his son.
All right.
And it's just magical. And of course, it's got the yellow soundtrack, so it's got the most amazing contemporary vibe. I just remember for some reason that film spoke to me. I'd also say American Werewolf in London is
that's a great
film. Again, one of these ones that I've watched repeatedly and almost can see each frame in my head.
Wow. Okay. Favorite TV show, old or new? Series.
Right. Well, at the moment, I'm completely engaged in Shtizzle, which is basically a soap opera set in Orthodox Jewish family in Jerusalem. That's about who marries who and who's falling in love with who and who's trying to find success and fulfillment within a quite constrained society, and a very secretive one, the Haredi Jews. In Jerusalem. It's amazing. I'm on the 3rd series, and I just don't want it to end.
Oh, right. So going back to your background, where is your family originally from?
Oh, they're from London.
Right. No, but I meant
they're sort of second generation.
second generation, but originally.
Eastern Europe, and also, well, my grandfather was from what was the Ottoman Empire, so he had Turkish citizenship, but he came here before it became Israel, and he used to speak Turkish and Hebrew and Arabic. So,
Crikey.
I mean, they called it Palestine then.
Yes, and so they should still, in my view. But anyway, that's a separate issue.
Yeah. So
having been over there, it's a nightmare. Anyway, moving on. Who's your favourite other artist?
My favourite other artist, probably Kate Bush. But just inventiveness, genius, brilliance, otherworldliness, futuristic vision. And I was blessed enough to go and see her play live when she played a few years ago. Not once, but twice.
Yeah, she's cool.
And I took Maxie as well, and he was saying, I've waited 35 years for this woman to come and do a bloody show.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was spectacular. What a voice. What again, an uncompromising artist from top to toe, someone who I hugely admire and love her music.
Okay, what's your most epiphanal moment, or the moment of where, like a fork in the road in your life, or you had a big wake up call, or a big change of direction, handbrake turn, whatever? Or has it been one continuous flow?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I don't think I can sort of answer it quickly because I'd have to think about it. I think that getting my first pair of decks was probably a bit of an epiphany. Thinking, I just don't want to stop doing this.
Right.
And it wasn't an aspirational career path then.
No.
Really whatsoever. It was just something I was completely drawn to, and I'd be practicing, and suddenly, 8 hours would have gone by.
Right.
Playing records, and trying to put them together and create this kind of jigsaw. So, yeah, I guess that must have been an epiphany because I'm still bloody doing it, aren't I?
Do you regard it as, part of your personality? For most people in the music industries, they want to share their joy in what they do with a lot of people. I mean, did you always have that as part of your personality?
Massively. I wanted other people to hear my music loud, and that was before I was a DJ. Like when I first heard the Sugar Cubes record, and
right.
Andy Weatherall had produced it, I remember playing it with my windows wide open. Or even before that, things like Jimi Hendrix, Axis Bold as Love. I remember having that album and making sure the neighbours heard it. I had a really shitty Philips stereo, and it was just even Adam and the Ants. I mean, just God, anything I could put on. Being Boiled, what a tune!
Yeah, there you go.
Or Love Action, one of my favourite.
Yeah.
From your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Really, I just loved playing music very loud. Probably quite an offensive neighbour to have.
Yeah.
So I do apologise for all those that I've offended.
Can you tell us what street you lived in?
Oh God, no, they'll come after me. They'll say a vigilante gang, and that'll be the end of that.
Okay, unfulfilled ambition.
Oh, Breaking America, I think.
Really?
We sort of very, very nearly got there. We did 7 tours. Yeah, it wasn't ready for dance music and any sort of mainstream radio.
Well, and now it is.
As Clive Davis said, it's the mixture of rap and electronic music is so futuristic. And then he signed us to Arista in the US.
Right.
We did several tours there, but because we were having records blowing up in the UK and Europe and all these other territories, we couldn't be in all these places at once. And maybe if we'd had management then, management would have said, no, look, every time you tour in America, you double record sales, because they really understand that treading of the boards and the live performance. Like Clive Davis, he said, you are the Nirvana of dance music. I'll never forget it. These are sort of legendary people getting excited about us. But we never had that synergy where a record would be on top 40 or we had a sync. We watched it with Dido, how her record exploded.
Yeah.
And she was already just touring only in America. So before the first record broke, you know, Here With Me, and then there was Stan, which obviously, you know, Eminem sampled her chorus on that song. But before those moments, she'd had a sync on Roswell High. She'd been on Sliding Doors, and there was rotation on MTV. So you see that there are various strands that have to come together. And it's really interesting because when you have success, it's almost like you can feel it. You can hear it everywhere you go. Then you switch on the telly, it's on MTV, it's on the box, it's on, you know, was it TMF, various music channels, the radio. There's this groundswell, and then you get Jules Holland. There are these little building bricks that happen when a record starts to connect with people. And we always got to sort of first base, if you like, in America, but never really dedicated the time and energy. Also touring, it was by then an 8-piece band round America. It was very expensive.
Yeah.
So, you know, we really needed to properly start selling out arenas like we were in Europe. We were, you know, so it was balancing that loss against profit everywhere else.
Yeah, I remember when...
never did it, probably never will.
Yeah, I was in New York doing an installation, and quite a big installation as a thing for a perfume company, Guerlain, I think it was. Anyway, but I was there, and I remember reading the paper, got the New York Times, and it said, Swedish House Mafia sell out Madison Square Garden faster than any artist has ever done. Or any the tickets for that, for anything, including sport, everything. It sold out in like 15 seconds or something. And I'm going, fucking hell. I'm in the wrong business as usual, you know.
Yeah, but then they get that wave of what they called EDM. It took 20 years to sort of percolate. You know, and it was David Guetta doing records with Snoop Dogg or whatever it was that kind of brought that marriage of rap and electronic music. Well, Kelly Rowland was this big kind of breakthrough hit from Destiny's Child. So, you know, it was kind of canny and clever, but they hadn't been ready for it before. Dance music was still quite ghettoized. There was always an underground scene there. It just hadn't kind of hit radio. It hadn't hit mass market in that way. And somehow those particular records, which I would say were quite faithlessy, big riffs.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned it.
You know, but it was also, kind of quite crass musically. But there it is. You know, what can you do? You can't be at the zeitgeist for everything.
No, you can't.
So yeah, I'd say that was my one regret, that we never really truly broke America. Despite Clive Davis's kind words.
Yeah.
I still feel like Nirvana on Monday morning. Soggy North London.
And finally, what's your favourite synth? Virtual synth, presumably. Is it?
Oh, I would still say actual synth. I'd say the Juno 106.
Yeah.
Because the richness, the depth, there's something about the connectors. God knows what it is about hardware. There's a richness in there. You know?
Yeah, 106 is...
I'm a big fan. Big fan.
Well, what an absolute pleasure this has been. And I'm sure...
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for being had.
Well, I'll pop round to the studio. Let me know. And
I will actually.
To hear what happens in 3D sound.
Oh my God! We'll have a special demo specifically for you, and
I've never experienced it.
You're gonna get it. Yeah.
Way.
I meant you're gonna get the 3D sound experience. All right, Charlene. Listen, I'll see you soon. I'll give you an email about meeting up to hear the 3D stuff.
Oh, that would be absolutely marvellous. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Pleasure.
See you later. Bye.